happens to be fascinated with time and with watches, among other things. Um, and so he writes a column for the Robb Report on high-end watches, among other things. But most notably, he writes for Wired magazine about technology and societal impact. He's written several books, but he is also and probably mainly, a conceptual artist and experimental philosopher. That's the word he uses. So he and I met a number of years back when I wrote a book about it's about African-American folk artists, Thornton Dial, Lonnie Holly, the Quilters of Gee's Bend, and this wealthy white, very controversial patron. At any rate, it got us talking about whether folk art even exists anymore. This folk is rural, kind of agrarian, untainted by popular culture. What is folk? And where can you be folk in a world where, your satellite dish can suck down 5,000 TV channels, or you can, get a connection on your smartphone wherever, right? It's hard to be isolated. So we thought, well, there are some living creatures where you might be able to have that kind of isolation and be folk. And the answer was botanical. So we got access to a Christmas tree farm in Cumming, Georgia, and we took 50 Leland cypress trees, living beings, and we affixed pencils to their limbs and put them in front of easels. And over the course of several days, they made art. The wind blew and the spiders crept on their limbs, and maybe, I don't know, the earth moved or something. Maybe they grew slightly, and they made marks on the pages. And then we culled the best work from those artists, and we curated them, and we framed them, and we put them on a show in West Midtown. So Jonathan, and there's a film about that a local filmmaker did called The Language of Limbs. But that guy, Jonathan Keats, and I did that. So that's how I met this guy, Jonathan Keats. And that was the mildest of his projects. Among other interesting things he's done are to copyright his brain, claiming it's a product he built by himself, neural network by neural network. He has attempted to engineer God in a petri dish and put him on the, what is the phylum, genus, species, whatever you call that, map of phylogenetic? Yeah. And he has identified, sounds from outer space and sucked them down into some sort of receiving dish, and converted those sounds via algorithm into artwork that was then framed and hung in the Berkeley Museum. So these are the kinds of things he's done. And at any rate, I started off working on what was going to be a book mainly about sensei and my meetings with sensei at the original Pancake House on Friday mornings. And in large part, this book I'm working on is still about that. But what happened was, as I started to think about Buckminster Fuller and his relationship to Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller, by the way, was like the mega genius, mad scientist inventor of 20th century America. And he was I can't even, influenced so many things, from things having to do with ecology, economy, architecture, engineering, that I wouldn't even know where to begin to try and describe in detail. Just to encourage you to look them up, Bucky or Buckminster Fuller. So to try to understand Buckminster Fuller better, I decided I better read something about him. But Buckminster Fuller, in his own writing and speaking, can be hard to follow. He would give talks that could last, 10 hours. So I thought, well, maybe what I need is Buckminster Fuller for idiots, and or some sort of simple biography. So I went online to find the most recent biography of Buckminster Fuller, and it turned out to have been written by Jonathan Keats. So, I'm always drawn by the confluence of things, those just sort of, I don't know what, spontaneous interactions of elements, if you will. And so I followed that path. And what I'm working on is talks about creative living through the lens of activities, or lens and activities done by three of people I consider mentors and mentors of theirs, right? So Sensei, Michael Elliston, who's our main teacher here, his mentor, Buckminster Fuller, who, as I've kind of dived into, found some very interesting, inspiring elements myself. And my friend, who's been a creative mentor to me, he's helped coach me and on writing and things like that, and that's Jonathan Keats. And Jonathan Keats is connected, right, through Buckminster Fuller, which connects back to Sensei. Well, but Jonathan Keats, I called up and I said, Jonathan, I didn't realize, I hadn't talked to you in a while, year or two, and it turns out you've written this book. He says, yeah, not only that, even though he lives in California and in Italy, his wife's in Italy, he lives in California. Makes for a good marriage, by the way. Now he would be spending the next 3 months in Asheville, North Carolina, just a few hours from here, because Black Mountain College, which no longer exists, and I'll tell you about in a minute, but Black Mountain College is doing a fellowship, Black Mountain College Museum, sort of sustaining the memory of this place, Black Mountain College, is doing a fellowship with the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And Jonathan Keats is the fellow that was chosen for the first quarter of 2018. Black Mountain College in the middle of the 20th century was the kind of the center of avant-garde art, literature, thinking, etc. in the United States from 1933 to 1957. This is a place where you would not expect to have the bastion of avant-garde activity. Anybody know where Black Mountain is in North Carolina? It's just outside of Asheville. It's about 20 minutes east of Asheville. A place formerly, and now again, known mainly as a center for Christian retreat. Billy Graham he lived there for a while. And so this is where Black Mountain emerged, from a few renegade professors from Rollins College who decided to create a new way of learning and espouse a new way of learning. What was Dewey's first name? Anyway, the education philosopher, teacher, Dewey, maybe Thomas. But anyway, a new way of educating people that frankly had art at its center, or the arts at its center. And they chose Black Mountain. I don't know why. I don't remember. But anyway, Black Mountain. So now at Black Mountain, here's this place in 1933 that had gay people. And even Black people. They let them in. In this really southern Bubba joint, right? At the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And people making wacky, weird stuff and integrating dance and theater and whatever. So, any rate, Buckminster Fuller taught there for a while. He taught there alongside a guy named John Cage, who those of you who are musicians will know the name, but also hugely influential to music, but one of those hugely influential people we may not necessarily know the name of. John Cage is best known for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is a musical composition in which the pianist comes on stage, opens the lid of the piano, sits on the bench, adjusts himself, and then sits there without moving for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. John Cage was a student of Zen, and Zen kind of infused and informed his artwork, including 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Now, let me ask you to sit, not for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, just for a couple of seconds. And let's just sit silently. John Cage's idea was to encourage the audience to absorb, appreciate, recognize the noise not only inside ourselves, but outside of ourselves, that's taking place right here, right now, the music in that sound. So 4 minutes and 33 seconds wasn't a joke. It was, it was an intentional provocation in some ways. Some 50 years later, Jonathan Keats created a ringtone called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I'll let you think about that for a minute. Imagine that ringtone. Anyway, Jonathan Keats at Black Mountain College fellowship decided, with the University of North Carolina, Asheville, decided that his project while up there would be to create a new kind of music. This music would be Copernican, meaning could be appreciated by any creature in the, in the universe. So as we wandered around downtown Asheville one day, we wandered in and out of old bookstores, in and out of old antique shops, and he had already somehow purchased a whole bunch of dog whistles, but at any rate, weird things, right? He as we walked into one, he found this old Hammond organ book, and he bought that. I'm like, what's that all about? Next morning, I found out he was creating instruments for this Copernican orchestra, instruments that could be heard by whatever various creatures in the known universe and unknown universe. And he that next morning had invented the world's first dog whistle organ. That was part of this. So for his performance, Sensei and I drove up there, and they met, and we talked about everything from Zen to time and so on. Because Jonathan Keats' next project, or at least the one he had on board at the time, he's got a few, very prolific guy. But the next one was he wanted to tell time by tracking the meander of rivers, and he was going to, if he could find a river or some entity that had authority over a certain river that meandered, he was going to tell time by placing stones following the meander of the river, and as that river moved in its meander, he would he would tie that into some calendar clock he was creating. Now, obviously, these are really, really long-term clocks. He once created a camera that took an exposure over 1,000 years. It was either 100 or 1,000, or maybe both. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff. So anyway, he's telling me this one night in Asheville while we're eating barbecue, and I'm trying to figure out what he's talking about. But I realized it was the first time that I thought about the word meander. What is a meander? Anybody go meandering? Right? We talked about hiking and kayaking earlier, right? Sometimes it's fun to just meander. Meander's kind of gotten a bad rap. We think about a meander as somebody that wanders aimlessly, right? But what I realized after kind of just digging in a little bit is that meander, the word, was named after a river, the Meander in Turkey, Meanderis. Uh, and the word meander came from the river. The river wasn't named for the idea of meander, it was the name of the river. And the river happens to be a very kind of loopy, zigzag thing through Turkey. That's where the word came from. So, at any rate, that's the long way around to the hook of the book, or the working title of this book, called "Follow the Meander: An Indirect Route to Creative Living," and it tracks lessons that I've kind of gleaned, not necessarily new, but maybe newly framed, from trying to be a mentee of Michael Elliston, a sensei, of Buckminster Fuller, of John Cage, of Jonathan Keats, and other people who just kind of see the world a little different. So there is a story, we can call it a koan. Koan's a sort of an illogical riddle, if you will, in Zen lore, about 100-foot pole, or 1,000-foot, or 10,000 foot, a really tall pole you don't want to be on the top of, right? If you were talking about real physical poles by yourself, what are you going to do up there? How are you going to get off? And the idea is, the challenge is, what happens if you step off that pole? How do you step off that pole? And so, how do you get started? How do you get started in it with a meander? The reason I want to champion a meander and the idea of meandering and things like that is that we live. Go ahead, Brandon. We live in a world where what seems right is the straight and narrow, or take that straight path, or how do we force our way through something? How do we strive and drive to achieve earlier and more? And I'm not suggesting there is wrongness in that, but it does leave out or seem to marginalize this idea of meandering. And those of us who sometimes spend more time meandering than driving and striving. And so that's again a little context for this. Okay, so I want to just read this to you, then I'll shut up. I promise. And let you guys talk. Just want to see what comes up for you. Um, from the top of a pole 100 feet high, how do you step forward? Asks a famous Zen master. Creative living is not difficult for those unafraid of stepping off the pole. Most Friday mornings, I step forward into the original pancake house, where the risk of plunging to my death is zero, but the opportunity for creative growth is great nonetheless. By 7:45 on Friday, the original pancake house in Atlanta is already percolating with characters. The gruff gargantuan waiter, the pink-haired cashier, prep school kids, retirees, caffeine fiends, and refugees from nearby sex shops and strip clubs. Also in the house are a fine artist, a professional designer, an accomplished writer, a compelling public speaker, a skilled musician, a game inventor, a craftsman, and a bona fide Zen master, but those are all the same person. Michael Elliston sits with the newspaper and a cup of coffee at booth 4 in the front corner of the pancake house with a view of the entrance. At age 78, Elliston still has a full crop of downy white hair clustered across the top of a broad head and a wispy goatee. He's a big presence physically and personally. He stands 6 feet 2 inches tall with a bulky frame, covered with a black cotton sweatshirt, black rimmed rectangular eyeglasses, hanging from the neck on a black retainer cord, black sweatpants, and black slip on shoes. You may have seen statues depicting the historical Siddhartha Gautama or Shakyamuni Buddha. That Buddha is the wiry one who sits cross legged in solemn meditation. You may also have seen statues of the semi historical, round, robust, laughing Buddha called Hote. You rub his belly at Chinese restaurants. That one. At first glance, Elliston looks like him. He's quick with a wide grin and a genuine laugh. Elliston looks up, smiles with his eyes as much as his mouth, and presses his hands together in a slight bow, which we call gasho. I return the gasho bow and then slide across the blue vinyl bench across the table from him. There are formal opportunities in Zen practice to have private one-on-one interviews with your primary teacher. The interviews, called dokusan in Japanese, are basically Zen coaching sessions. Dokusan usually takes place in the inner sanctum of a Zen temple, and the Atlanta Soto Zen Center, which Elliston founded in 1977, is just a 2-mile drive from the Pancake Diner. Over the past year, though, my encounters with Sensei have spilled beyond the temple walls and into the Pancake Diner, providing informal chances to gain his guidance. Diner Dokusan, I call it. A koan is an illogical riddle assigned to Zen students to provoke a response born of intuition beyond intellect. The basic riddle we confront daily is this: what is it to live a meaningful, constructive life? The founder of Soto Zen, Eihei Dogen, called it the Genjo Koan, the all-encompassing question. Implicitly, Genjo Koan is at the core of each Diner Dokusan discussion. So where do you want to start, he asks. Well, let's start right there, I say, exactly there, which is, how do you start? I'm asking explicitly about how Elliston begins one of his paintings, but I'm thinking about how any of us can start living more creatively. How do you begin a meander? Michael Elliston refers to his art as painting without a painter, and you can see some of it on the walls behind us. It's hard to say whether he starts a new painting or whether it starts itself. He spontaneously pours paint onto a surface and frees the liquid to, of its own accord, wash over and into the substrate. The painting occurs as pigments are repelled and attracted, absorbed and dispersed, fractalized and neutralized by each other, the canvas and ambient elements. The visual result is like lying on your back and gazing at the sky. It's a parade of billowing color clouds, smoky contrails, primordial pigment crystals, eroded coastlines, desert ridges, ribbons of dragon tail, and swirling nebulae. When Elliston sold his first painting at age 70, it was the underlying surface material which served as his creative starting point. He eschewed traditional cloth canvas, choosing instead to experiment with hard laminate backdrops. He would spread watercolor paint or Japanese sumi ink and watch the interaction. Eventually, he chose as his canvas an aluminum composite material used for outdoor signage. Most of Elliston's paintings have another surface hovering over the aluminum clad panel, a clear plexiglass covering on which more pigment is spread and through which you can simultaneously see foreground and background. Nearly 10 years later, settled on the background material, Elliston sees color as his starting point, but even that isn't completely clear. He prefers dirty colors. I've been using dirty colors recently, he says. I mix watercolors from opposite sides of the color wheel, complementary colors, and it usually turns into gray or brown. Then I put those in spice jars and set them on the shelf and let the pigments settle in the water. After a while, you get a layer of heavy pigment at the bottom and the lighter pigments at the top, like a rainbow effect if you have three or more colors. When it's time to use them, I either shake them up or just pour off the colors from the top. It creates muted colors. Beginnings are often like that, like a river's source, a bit muddy and ambiguous. Before the painting begins, Elliston also prepares the aluminum canvas with what he refers to as furniture. The visual art version of John Cage's prepared piano process, which I didn't mention earlier, but John Cage, the musician I mentioned, would compose piano pieces and then fix up the piano by putting nuts and bolts and little, rubber strips inside or in between the strings on the piano. So when you play, it might sound might sound regular, and all of a sudden, right, it would make weird noises. So this is what Elliston does with his canvases. Elliston randomly places objects beneath the surface, adding sticks of various sizes to impact the color's flow. In this way, each painting is prepared to begin with indeterminacy. You may begin with color or substrate, sound or substance, no matter, maybe mix them up. If you listen with your ear, it is hard to hear truly, but if you listen with your eye, then you begin to hear properly, said Zen Master Muman in his collection of koans called The Gateless Barrier. Elliston's father, Kinky Elliston, swear to God, Kinky Elliston played in a jazz band. His brother, Ron Elliston, was a renowned jazz pianist and a music professor at the University of Maryland. It's understandable then that Elliston views his paintings as music for the eyes. Sometimes music has a vocal track, and in the case of Elliston's paintings, he sometimes writes haiku poetry to accompany his pieces. Here are 5, each titled after an Elliston painting. Paleolithic. Deep in a dank cave, illuminated by my torchlight, tracks of ancient life. Firebird. Trailing fire behind, flying free across the sky, the phoenix rises. Earth song. Springing from Earth's crust, streaming through the endless sky, contrail of karma. Ocean gate. Swimming through this gate, somewhere beneath the ocean, fish become dragons. Secondary harmony. Earth, wind, fire, water, all 4 elements collide. Where's the beauty? To carry the self forward and realize the 10,000 things is delusion. That the 10,000 things advance and realize the self is enlightenment, Zen Master Dogen wrote. How do you meander off a 100-foot pole? Open your entire body-mind to experience the infinitely small and infinitely large with no difference. Then let the 10,000 things step forward towards you. Now, my eyes can see that the 10,000 things step forward advice is much easier seen, heard than done. It feels unsafe to simply let things step forward. I struggle to start things that way without tricking myself into it. So for a long period of time, I adopt John Cage's way of beginning a creative meander. I consult an oracle of indeterminacy. I let the I Ching lead the way. I download an I Ching app for my smartphone. It allows me to virtually toss ancient Chinese coins. Each random outcome points to an I Ching hexagram which shares commentary and guidance for whatever situation I'm currently facing. I begin by doing what it says. Of all the possible results, there's one I Ching hexagram that occurs so often in response to my queries that I wonder if the app is rigged. Or perhaps my issues are so evident to the universe that the repeated result is inevitable. It's the hexagram called Kun, the receptive. Am I pronouncing that right? Kun? Kun's message is simple. Quit forcing yourself onto the world. Instead, lay back and open to what steps forward. Begin, the I Ching constantly reminds, by doing nothing extra. The right intention with which to step off a 100-foot pole is not knowing. A Zen master asked his student, "Where are you going?" The student replied, "Around on pilgrimage." The Zen master asked, "What's the purpose of the pilgrimage?" The student said, "I don't know." Zen master replied, "Not knowing is nearest." You may say that stepping off a 100-foot pole is an act of foolishness that can only lead to one outcome. The stepper will plummet, smack, and splatter. Gravity. However, you have made the mistake of assuming that I referred to a real physical pole. You may say that stepping off a 100-foot pole is an act of hope, which can only lead to one outcome. The stepper will soar. Faith. However, you will have made the mistake of assuming that I was biased towards optimism. The truth is that you do not know, and neither do I. Step. You might ascend. You might splash. Who knows? Splashing is an art. It is art. Haboku Sansui is one of Japan's designated national treasures, a hanging scroll landscape painted with splashed ink technique. The artist Sesshu Toyo was a Zen Buddhist monk who painted the image in 1495 in the style originated by the Chinese painter Wang Qi during the Tang Dynasty some 700 years earlier. Shouting and singing after an evening of heavy drink, Wang would fling ink onto silk and then smear it with his feet and hands, and then paint whatever the random image suggested to him. Sesshu and other more sober Wang successors refined approach, manipulating the ink with facile brushstrokes that teased abstract splashes into ridge of pines, a rocky mountain precipice, a raging waterfall, or an orchid cluster. The biggest selling artist at auction is a name you may not know, announced a 2017 headline in the New York Times. In 2016, his artwork sold for over $354 million at auction, outstripping sales for work by Picasso. The artist is Zhang Daqian, splash ink painter. Sometimes it's valuable to start with a splash. Now, in a prior chapter, I write of an interview my youngest daughter had at a private school, in which the first question they ask these children is, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" 4.5-year-old kid. One kid says, "I want to be an astronaut." And the evaluator says, "That's wonderful. Why, little Timmy, 4-year-old Timmy, do you want to be an astronaut?" And he says, "I want to explore the outer reaches of space." Okay. Little girl, little girl next to Timmy, what do you want to be when you grow up? A doctor. Fantastic. What a great aspiration, 4-year-old girl. Why do you want to be a doctor? What kind of doctor do you want to be? I want to save lives. I want to be a surgeon, she says. Little daughter of Andrew Keisei, Andrew Dietz, what do you want to be when you grow up? She says, a ghost. After ascertaining the future earnings potential of several 4-year-old children, the kindergarten admissions evaluator asks each to draw on a printed coloring sheet set out on the table. Look how nicely you're coloring within the lines, the evaluator beams at a cherubic girl moppet. She then turns her big smile at my daughter, who scribbles ferociously over the lines of an outline cartoon character. One eyebrow arches to the ceiling. The smile tightens. "And what are you drawing there?" asks the evaluator. My daughter stops, looks up, deadpan. "The insides of your body," she says. How do you step off a 100-foot pole? Don't wait. Don't know. Do nothing extra. Start with your eyes, ears, or feet. Start with a wild scribble or make a splash. Just go. Step into the original frontier. Then step into the one after that. Always interesting to read something you've written out loud for the first time and realize how desperately you need to edit it. But at any rate, I wonder if that sparked any thoughts that might be useful for you. Yeah, Michael.
Well, first, let me tell you, a picture paints 1,000 words, and your portrayal of Sensei's art was extremely eloquent. And I think I applaud that because it's not easy to do. And I, in fact, may need to hire you to do it for me. Also, I actually have a definition for meander, which is the lapse of time that occurs while my coffee is brewing. But the last thing I wanted to ask, which I found intriguing, you referred to Sensei as a Zen master.
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, a life journey, that is more rare to find than the original Picasso at a state sale. And I would like to hear your authentic reason why you would entitle the human being as a Zen master, and why, if in fact this is how you truly feel.
Well, there's I guess, sort of the technical definition, if you will, somebody that's reached mastery and is a given transmission.
But Zen master is the top of the food chain.
I don't know what I don't know what the food chain is, or who determines that. But in terms of giving transmission, I don't know how much higher you go on the food chain. You can infinitely higher, and maybe there are no masters because there's no end to the level of awakening somebody can achieve. But I think in sort of like, I went back to the book that I wrote originally called The Last Folk Hero, which is about folk art. What makes something folk art? Who the hell knows, right? But we need a term to describe this kind of thing, and that's the one we choose. So that's the only reason. I have no other reason to use it than to describe somebody who's recognized as one of the senior most teachers. I think it's fair to say he's probably one of the senior most teachers, probably on the Eastern Seaboard, in terms of his experience, his age. He's been transmitted twice, not once. I think the scope of his teachings, the impact of his work, having read other people's work, seen some of them in action. In the same way that I call my martial arts instructor Sifu, teacher, sensei, to me, that's at least my use of it, that's synonymous. So I'm not really thinking about this guy's the most holy one in the world or something like that. Well, that's all.
My perception of mastery, a pursuit. Some people have this genetic quirk of the pursuit of mastery, some don't. Artists tend to, but it doesn't fall within that arena. I can master oil painting. I can master my bicycle. I can master any number of things. I can master house painting, regardless. But a Zen master has the capacity to move comfortably through all arenas and transcend amongst them. This is my overlaid impression of what a Zen master is after a lifetime of martial arts, that it is something higher than just someone who has mastered orthodontic, mastered,
So, Michael, are you saying that Michael Elliston is not a Zen master?
No, I'm just saying that you referred to him as a Zen master. It's the first I've heard it since I've been here, and I'm asking. I guess it is a trigger point for me because it is no small compliment. It's an extreme term, in my impression.
Well,
go ahead.
Sticking around here long enough to get a brown robe is an extreme practice. You know, I mean, it's almost self-defining in that way. I mean, if you have gone through, if you sat and stared at a wall long enough that somebody else is going to give you a brown robe, I think that I don't know what other definition of mastery you'd need.
I'm reminded of, I'm going to get the story wrong, so I'm just going to change the facts.
Good. That's my favorite kind of story.
Somebody going to, guy goes to this Zen temple, and the monk there's, I think, bowing to these wooden sculptures of Buddha. The guy says, bowing to wooden sculptures. I just as soon burn them as bow to them. And the monk says, you burn them, I bow to them. And Zen masters, use it, don't.
Yeah,
Tomato, is that what I just heard? I'm not
sure.
Well,
no, it's, you know, if you're uncomfortable with the term,
I'm not uncomfortable with the term. I'm seeking authenticity of the term.
One of my mentors my entire life is well, besides John Cage, who I did get to meet once.
Cool.
Wow. It was pretty weird. But it was a guitarist named John Fahey that recorded in the late 60s, early 70s. That was kind of the peak of his work. And, you know, he founded the genre of what he called American primitive guitar. Seriously, this is one of the greatest guitarists that's ever lived. And, but he was also a massive alcoholic and lost most of his guitars in the late 70s and was basically living as a homeless person and staying afloat by going to flea markets and places like that and buying records and then reselling the records. That's what this great genius was reduced to. And they, toward the end of his life, a couple of younger guitar players found him and got him back to a certain amount of health and got him practicing again and sent him out on a tour. And he came and played here. This was about 20 years ago. And about a third of it was the best thing I've ever heard in my life. And about a third of it was really just kind of there. You know, you could tell he wasn't really engaged. His hands were moving, but he wasn't really engaged with it. And the bottom third of it was just pointless nonsense. And he was doing things like unplugging a guitar and plugging it into another guitar and sitting there looking at the sound man, waiting for the sound man to come fix it. And since I knew the people who promoted the show, I got backstage and was able to talk to him. He's a very tall guy, and I shake his hand and I just go on and on about how I've listened to every record he's ever made, and he's my favorite guitarist ever. Has influenced my playing my entire life. He just looked at me and went, burrito. And then looked off in the other direction. And, you know, I at that moment, I kind of had to ask myself, what is mastery? What exactly was this mentor relationship that I had invented? You know, I mean, because, you know, he did really squander his gift on addiction and mental illness that he wouldn't fix. And, you know, this tour that they were able to prop him up and get him to do, I mean, he was almost a cadaver of his former self. But he was still John Fahey. About a third of the night that he played that set was absolutely magical. Some of the best guitar playing I've ever heard. So, you know, you look through the canon of the literature of Zen and people that have been termed Zen masters and other aspects of their lives are complete jackasses. And you have to look at you know, the way a lot of these guys treated their students was not all that important. You know, is it to say, I'm not just going to give this to you. just because you show up here, I'm not just going to give it to you. You're going to have to prove you can take a certain amount of abuse, that you're strong enough to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this isn't for everybody. I mean, there are people that come in here, sit on the cushion, and snap, never come back. It's more than, there's nobody in there but you. Mm-hmm. And that's more than some people can handle. So, I mean, you've got to, I think, be ready for a little roughness, and you've got to be ready to be let down by your mentors.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
that's part.
I have many times over the years, and I, this chapter doesn't deal with it, but this book will be dealing with this is not a hagiography or whatever the word is.
Yeah.
So Fuller, the biography, for example, that Keats wrote about Buckminster Fuller is to, in large part, honor him, but it really strips away the mystique that's been built around him and the stories he told about himself. Now, was he a genius? I think he was. Did he position himself in a certain way to make him look more like that? But yeah, he probably did. It's just those stories he told. Maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't. But none of these people, Mike and I were talking about this just before coming in here. Nobody is perfect. And it's the imperfection that frankly makes somebody more appealing to me as a teacher or mentor. Otherwise, I'm not sure I trust them. Presenting themselves as a flawless, perfect being. But that's just my bias. Kevin, do you have something else?
I can shift to, I think, the other focus, which you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
There's none of that is the focus of the chapter or that piece I wrote, but yeah, it's okay.
I particularly love the piece and the idea of, the model or the conception of stepping off and plummeting to your death, stepping off and flying away. I forget your word, glorious wings kind of thing. The line about optimism was good. Begs another question of how does one know when one is stepping off the pole? And that's in some sense, I think that's, for me at least, that's a struggle of creativity,
Well, this is where I want to circle back to maybe before the sound was on here, but I was asking about the smallest measure of time. Whatever that smallest measure is, however often that occurs, that's how often we're stepping off the pole. If we want to try to live open and spontaneously, creatively, how far can you meander in that nanosecond? I'm not sure. Again, this is a draft that I've written, but that's kind of the message I want to leave somebody with. Like, it's not one and done, although we do have to somehow get started. And there's that idea of starting any creative work or creative, the tyranny of the blank page, as they say. How do I start? But that's something that we challenge ourselves to be open like that if we want to create or live creatively every instant.
I related it to just stepping out of your comfort zones.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways it could be taken.
Stepping away from safety.
And I guess, in a longer period of time, beyond a mini nanosecond or whatever, can you recognize when you're stopping yourself, when you're putting fences up around your own creative progress, that pen you in and keep you from moving freely forward, whichever way the water flows, one way or the other, and that's okay, or straight for a while. I would answer unclear if I were you, but anyway, I don't know.
I think my question was unclear too.
What else? Did I bore you into a stupor?
No, you drove.
I think you drove most of us into a contemplative place, because this has been very, I don't even have a word for it. Just
Yeah, I mean, I'm contemplating this alongside you and whoever might read this, because I don't know.
Can I at least compliment you on your literature, because it was wonderful.
Thanks.
you're a wordsmith, a true wordsmith.
Truly.
You know, it's we all have things that we kind of relish with. You know, but for me, you know, words are the ones that I can work with. I can't work with sound the way some of you guys can, or logic or philosophy or whatever else. But that was what, you know, the flip side of words is the trap that they put you in. And, you know, words are, you know, it's how I make my living, but words are also the bane of my existence, because I get so stuck in them and believe them and chase them and get pissed off about them and things like that. So, but writing like this is a, you know, it's a more free and enjoyable thing. And Kevin and I were talking about this earlier, right? Like, talk about how you described it. You kind of push something in motion and then you follow it. Say that again. I like that.
I'm trying to write. I find that my writing style is basically to get some idea. Sometimes it's a line. It's what I did with you. You wrote those original pancake stories. I started reading them, and I just take it and start writing and start following. Like, I don't structure what I write. When I start a story, I have no idea where it's going. And it's like, that's a beautiful line. Let's say that. And what would the next line be in that? And it becomes a meander.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of my structure.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the pole thing, it's what I love it, because I think it's like, I think that's what I'm trying to do. It's why I use your writing as a pole to try to step off.
Yeah, it's
What's happening in the booth next. He writes about sitting in the booth talking to the sensei. I started writing stories of what's happening in the booth next to it.
Yeah. So if you the early stuff that I originally called the book the original Pancake, Breakfast, Buddha, and Breakthrough Ideas, because Sensei Mike Wilson has written a book called Original Frontier. The idea of we like to chase frontiers, explore new territory, but there's and it's always out somewhere else, far away, undiscovered. But we have one right here inside us. You know, what's going on in here? What is this? Is the original frontier? The original frontier is, you know, us stripped back to our childlike mind, and you know, what does that look like? So at any rate, because we meet at the original Pancake House, just so happens, and he's writing about the original frontier. That's where I was doing it. But I was instructed that a potential buyer wouldn't necessarily know, you know, what that book was about. I think it was a pancake recipe book. So, but at any rate, so I'd written a bunch of pieces that had the headline of Original Pancake, and I called them Pancake episode pancakes. And maybe did about 5 or so of them, and they're on a blog called ideamonger.org, ideamonger.org. And Kevin read them, and Kevin wrote this piece that is also up there about being a guy in the booth next to us, where you got this, you know, this sort of weird 2 people sitting there eating pancakes and talking about, you know, 12th century or whatever, 13th century Zen priests off of Cheshire Bridge Road, and you know, near the Star Galaxy porn shop or whatever. It's just bizarre. But Kevin did a great job of writing, and I encourage you to go there.
I thought it was funny to write a fictionalized version of what you were writing as a factual narrative.
I thought that was great. So anyway. What else before we wrap?
Andrew, we have a comment on Mixler in regards to the mastery and master conversation.
Okay.
D-Tune says, master with an uppercase M versus master with a lowercase m. Ellison Roshi has been acknowledged by the lineage as having gotten it, and in this sense, he is a master with an uppercase M. Part of the issue with Zen master or master in general is our desire for absolute concrete terms. The question of whether one is a master also is highly subjective. Just because one person is a master to one person does not mean that person is a master to another. This question can only be answered by each individual, and there is no absolute or universally right answer.
That is a wonderful response, and much appreciated. I do want to be transparent too that, you know, I'm not writing this book for those of you who are deeply steeped in Zen and think about these issues of big M, little m, or anything like that. Really trying to, you know, while I tell these stories, and they're stories you already know, right? Some of you. But I'm trying to make this accessible to those who don't think about these things regularly. And you can't spend time in a book that you want to be accessible to many by defining terms, you know, in minute detail in every, you know, way it might be looked at. You just put it out there in a way that is generally understood and accepted. That's the same thing with that word folk, right? It's like, you know what? It could be called folk, it could be called outsider, it could be called intuitive art, it could be called self-taught art, it could be called, you know, I got more, right? And what's the difference? That we could say, well, they're all different, and let's go through the differences. Who the fuck cares? Excuse me. But maybe, but not the general audience that I wanted to try to reach. So we just called it folk hero, right? You get the idea. I have to work on my anger. That's another story.
I want to
No,
do something.
you're doing fine.
You
with
should
it.
meditate.
What's that?
I want to say something real quick about 433.
Yeah.
Because there's an aspect of 433 that I love that I don't really hear people talk about a lot.
Yeah.
Which is that 433 is a full orchestral piece.
Oh, right. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's.
What he said about
Well, I've seen it
433,
both ways. I've seen it both ways.
I've actually performed it with a punk band.
Yeah,
I mean,
cool.
he wrote it with the intention that it could be performed by any group of musicians anywhere.
Well, but my point is that with 433, when you're performing with a full orchestra or with a punk band,
Yeah.
you're revealing, you're laying bare the entire ideology of the apparatus that is performing.
It is supposed to be.
Yes.
So when there's an orchestra, you have to keep in mind that everybody is still sitting there. They still have their sheet music. They're still counting. They're still turning the page. You still paid to go.
Yeah.
You know, you are the entire apparatus of that venue, the music venue, and the musicians is all laid bare with no music there.
Well, there's still sound.
Yeah, there's still
music,
sound.
There's still sound, but you know, the most confusing thing about me to 433 is he claims it took him 6 months to write.
Well,
it
on
took a lot of editing. It does.
and he could very well be talking about, you know, because he had to put together an orchestra. He had to you know, get a venue for it. He had to.
Well,
He had to sell a bunch of tickets. Like, I don't know what he was talking about, but he could have been talking about.
Well, he claimed that he spent 6 months writing. I mean, it's actually writing, and it's nothing. If you've ever seen the score, it's nothing but rest stops.
Yeah.
It's a true reductionist piece.
Of course he did.
I'm
My
gonna,
bet is he had a grant that was going to run out in 6 months.
That could
He
be.
was working on something.
I'm going to wrap up with 4 minutes and 33 seconds because it just triggered something. So 4 minutes and 33 seconds and other John Cage properties, let's say, are governed now by the John Cage Trust, which is at Bard College. And Dr. Kuhn is the director. Dear Dr. Kuhn, I'm writing to inquire about permissions related to John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I'm developing a book which includes extensive reference to Mr. Cage and his methods, accomplishments, and legacy. The book is tentatively titled Follow the Meander, an Indirect Route to Creative Living. I'd like to include the following chapter as produced in its entirety below between the lines. Here's the chapter. Title, Meandering Interlude. Copy. Please enjoy 4 minutes and 33 seconds sitting in silence with this chapter. End of chapter. In addition to the print edition, I am planning an audio version of the book. I'm not titling the chapter 4 minutes and 33 seconds, as you can see, nor am I using the sound from any prior recording of Mr. Cage's or anyone else's performance of the piece. If 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence in the audio is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence in the audio version copyrighted? Do I need permission of the John Cage Trust to include said silence? If so, will you grant me such permission? Gratis. Thank you in advance for your attention to this matter.
Did you get a response to that?
Well, yeah, I did. She said, "Dear Andrew, your question is a good one." Oh, where'd it go? And needs to be directed to our publisher, blah, 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 who I've CC'd here. Now, I've emailed this guy, and I added a suggestion that, you know, what if instead of calling it 4 minutes and 33 seconds, I refer to it as 273 seconds? Would that be okay? Or what if I made it, you know, 4 minutes and 32 seconds? You know, would that make a difference? And the question really is, who owns silence?
Oh,
And
Simon
that's how it
and
took 6 months.
Simon and Garfunkel.
That's the sounds of silence. That's something else. Anyway, thank you for taking time to indulge me. Appreciate it. And we could do the 3 closing verses, or we could just wrap up. Let's indulge our guests and really freak them out so they'll never want to come back.
So you hit the gong 3 times.
And then a stop.
How about we get naked?
Stop.
Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you.
Thank you.